Mesechus Círoבין, Perik Ches, Mishnah Beis. Says the Mishnah, Kamohu Shiuroi. What is the shear that is required for your Erev Techumin? What shear? In the Mishnah discusses the shear in terms of bread, in terms of lechem. For Erev Techumin, you don't actually have to use lechem, but there'll be you can use other things which are not lechem. But then the shear would be the amount it takes to be lalafes asapas, to accompany the amount of bread which is required, as mentioned in the Mishnah here. So what is the shear of the bread? Mozon shtei seuda, sufficient bread to provide for 2 meals, the chol echod, for each one, for any individual who's going to use the Erev Techumin. Mezono lachol velo l'shabbos divrei Rab Meir. Rab Meir says we use a meal, in a weekday meal, rather than a Shabbos meal, whereas Rabbi Yehuda Omer, la Shabbos velo l'chol, we use the bread which you use in a Shabbos meal rather than in a weekday meal. V'zeh v'zeh miskavnin l'hokel. Each one had an intention to be a kula. What do I mean by that? According to Rab Meir, says mezono l'chol v'lo l'Shabbos, that is, the amount of bread one consumes in a weekday meal is less than the amount of bread which is consumed on a Shabbos meal. Because on Shabbos, because of Oneg Shabbos, one tends to eat a bit more, and therefore the 2 seudas are defined in terms of a weekday meal. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says, no, la Shabbos v'lo l'chol, and strangely he learns that the amount of bread that one eats on Shabbos at a Shabbos meal is less than the amount of bread than one eats in a weekday meal. Now, why should that be so? And the Mefarshim give 2 reasons. The first reason, that because on Shabbos one has 3 meals, whereas on a weekday, in those days anyway, they used to only have 2 meals, and therefore one tends to eat less on Shabbos. And the second interpretation is, because on Shabbos you eat, in addition to bread, you have a lot of delicacies, and therefore one would tend to eat less bread than the weekday. On a weekday there's not so much delicacy, and therefore the main part of the meal would be the bread. And therefore, says Rabbi Yehuda, on Shabbos, in a Shabbos Seuda you would eat less bread, whereas Rabbi Meir considers that on a weekday meal that you would eat less bread than on a Shabbos meal. The Mishnah continues to give 2 further opinions as to the size of the Seuda. The relationship between Rabbi Yochanan ben Baruch and Rabbi Shimon to Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda is difference of opinion in the Mefarshim, but we will leave that. And Pashtus, it's the four opinions in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan ben Baruch Omer, Rabbi Yochanan ben Baruch says, mikikar, you take a loaf of bread, a kikar, you can get sufficient bread for 2 seudas. What size loaf do we use? A kikar, which is measured bapundin, which is bought with a pundian, me'arba soin besela, when the price of the grain is 4 saw for the price of a selah, the price of a coin of a selah. Let me elaborate here that the pundian, a selah contains 4 dinrim. A dinner is 6 more, and a more is 2 pundionin. So every selah, coin of a selah, consists of 48 pundionin. And therefore, since a saw is 6 kav, therefore 4 saw would be 24 kav, and the rate is the mi'arba saw in besela, 4 saw with a selah, that means that with 1/48th of a selah, which is 1 pundian, you'd buy half a kav worth of grain. So 1 pundian would purchase half a kav of grain. Half a kav would be 12 eggs, because there are 4 log in a kav and 6 eggs in a log, and therefore the amount one pundian would in fact purchase 12 eggs. So we say mekika bapundian me arba soin besela, a kika which is purchased with a pundian, which would mean 12 eggs. However, the Gemara explains it doesn't mean 12 eggs. In fact, we're talking about raw grain here. In order to produce a loaf of bread, then half the grain would go for the to the nachtom, to the baker. So in effect, this kicker consists of 6 eggs. That means you're allocating 3 eggs per su'udah. So you have the amount of the Erev Techumin is 2 su'udas, which in fact is 2 su'udas. Each su'udah is 3 eggs, according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroko. So a loaf consisting, a kicker, the size of a kika which provides for 2 su'udas would in fact be a loaf of bread which is the size of the size of 6 eggs, because 1 suda would be 3 eggs. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroko. Rabbi Shimon says you don't have to use a full-size kika. You can use shtei yodas la kika. You can use 2/3 of a kika. It's a kula in Eirovin. You don't need a full 2 sudas. You can have 2/3 of 2 sudas. 2/3 of the loaf that would provide for the 2 sudas for Eirovin. Misholosh lakav, that is, 1 kav is a third of the. So 1 kika is 3 kavs. So 1 kav is a third of a kika. So 1 kav is, say, a third of a kika. And therefore, a third of a kav, in fact, is 8 eggs, because we said that the kav contains 24 eggs. So the amount of 2 su'udas, the kika size would be in fact 8 eggs. But Reb Shimon says for Eirovin you can be makel, instead of taking a loaf the size of 8 eggs, you can take 2/3 of the kika, which would work out in fact to be 5 1/3 eggs, as 2/3 of 8 eggs. Then the Mishnah continues, Chetzio lebeis hamenugo. There's a din that if someone goes into a beis hamenuga, a bayis sheyesh bo nega, if he comes into a house where there is a nega, then whatever he is carrying becomes tomei, and his garments only require washing if he remains inside the Beis HaManuga, the shear takes to of Achila, which is the shear of 1 suda. So therefore, with regard to Eirovin, it's 2 sudas, and therefore it's the shear of 1 suda, which was half the size of the shear of Erev Techumin. And therefore, according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroko, who says the shear of 2 sudas is 6 eggs, then it would be the amount of time it takes to eat Kedei Achilas Pras, which would be 3 eggs. According to Rab Shimon, who says a suda is the 2 sudas would have been 8 eggs, but it's reduced for the purpose of Eirovin to 2/3, which is 5 1/3. So you take half the shear of 8 eggs, which would be the amount of time it takes to eat 4 eggs of chitin, and that's the amount of time it would take if he's there in the Beis HaManug at that amount of time, then his garments would become tomei. The Mishnah concludes with regard to the psul of the body. Normally, ochlin cannot be metame odom. Chazal made a gezerah if a person eats ochlin, which are tomei, midrabonon, it would be metame the guf, because he comes to eat trumo and tomei food at the same time. So therefore, they made a gezerah that if a person eats food, then it would be metame the body. What is the shear of food which would be metame the body? So it's v'chatzi chetzio, that is half the shear, half a suda, and half the shear of the Beis HaManuga. Therefore, according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroko, the shear of a suda is 3 eggs, and therefore for livsoles hagavia would be 1.5 eggs. According to Rabbi Shimon, the shear of a suda is 4 eggs, and therefore the shear to passel the gavia, to passel the body, would be half a suda, which in fact would be 2 eggs. We have a major machlokus in halacha. Generally speaking, when we talk about the shia of kedei achilas pras, the amount of time it takes to eat half a su'uda, which is so relevant with regard to many halachas in Hilchas Achilo, Hilchas Yom Kippur, and many other halachas. And the question is, do we paskin like Reb Yochanan ben Baroko, or do we paskin like Reb Shimon? Is the shia of a achilas pras, is it the shia of 4 eggs, or is it the shia of 3 eggs? And it's based on this machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroko and Rabbi Shimon.